back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am in a slightly different filming location at the moment, and that is because now that we're in December, I have an entirely huge pile of Christmas presents on my floor, ready and waiting to be given out. And I cannot film in front of my usual bookshelf because of the sheer amount of presents that are waiting there. So we're in front of my TBR shelf today, which is quite good for you guys because then you can see what I have that I own that I've not got around to reading yet, minus this pile here, because this pile I'm going to use for today's video. And today's video is quite an exciting one because today I am teaming up with the Book Smugglers blog, which is run by Anna and Thea, and they have an amazing blog. If you've never checked it out, you definitely should. And each year around the month of Christmas, they do an event called Smugglivus. And Smugglivus is all about celebrating Christmas, wrapping up the year, talking about science fiction and fantasy, some of the great things, some of the not so great things, lists. They are fantastic bloggers and they're really influential in the SFF world, and I would definitely recommend them if you've not checked their blog out. They have some really interesting content, and they asked me if I wanted to do a post for their Smugglivus celebration, so I said yes. And they didn't really specify what I could do, they kind of just left it open for me. So I've chosen today to talk about some of my favourite fantasy and science fiction women who are pictured in books that I've read this year. They didn't necessarily come out this year, but I read them this year. So I'm going to talk about the ladies that I'm most related to and why I'm most related to them, what it was about those particular women in those particular stories that really connected to me personally, and why I would recommend that you check out these authors if you are looking for interesting, dynamic, unique and really relatable female characters in fantasy. So just as a little bit of background on this, I wanted to talk about why I find it hard to connect to some of the characters in everyday fantasy. A trend that I have noticed, and I'm sure many of you, if you are readers of SFF, have noticed, is that certain areas of the genre, particularly the epic fantasy side of the genre, are dominated largely by male writers, and therefore male writers are more likely, not necessarily, but more likely to choose to write about male characters because that is what they know and that is what they know well. However, there are some attempts by male writers to write female characters in their stories. Sometimes it goes perfectly fine and it's great, and sometimes it goes horribly wrong because they fall into the traps of stereotyping. It seems like it's definitely harder to write someone of the opposite gender from yourself. It seems to be a common theme in fantasy that male writers don't always get it right when it comes to female characters, and the exceptions to this rule are characters such as the badass or the one who is a hero. Usually in fantasy, when you're following a story, whether it's got a male or female lead, they are the hero, they're the chosen one, they're the badass who's going to go on a quest and they need to complete it, they need to be strong enough, they need to be witty enough, all of these things that they need to be. And a lot of the female characteristics we don't necessarily associate with heroes. In the classic fantasy, some of the tropes you might see women falling into and being put into the bracket of include witches, hags, and evil sorceresses. You also get the badass character, who I would kind of pin as almost a Lara Croft style character, and that's what you predominantly see in most fantasy books, or what I've seen over my reading. I don't dislike these characters necessarily, but what I do find is that they are far too dominant in the genre, and it's quite hard for people to break out of this mould and do something different and create a more genuine, more realistic and more three-dimensional character than just falling into a stereotype. In terms of history and realism, a lot of people criticise changing the way that things were in history when you're writing a fantasy book. To me, this makes absolutely no sense. Just because women were not allowed to do things in the past of our own world does not mean that in the world you are writing they should not be allowed to do things, because where's the sense in that? It's a fantasy world, you're making it up, there's magic, there's things that do not exist in our world anyway. Why not just change the past? Why not break things and do something different and challenge yourself as a writer to write something that isn't what you know, but is something magical and better than what you know? I think that would be great. With all that in mind, why I want to see great characters and what I feel is lacking from the genre, let me tell you about 8 different female characters who really resonated with me for different reasons this year, and why I think you should read them. My first example of 2 women that I can relate to and that I find really interesting and wonderful fantasy female characters come from the Wayward Children series, of which this is the second book. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway, the second book is Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and you can see from the size of this that it is a novella, so the series is made up of novellas. It's quite short and very easy to get into. This story focuses on Jack and Jill, who are 2 of the characters that we've met in book 1, but this is their backstory, so you could in theory start with this book, although you won't necessarily know as much as a reader who has read both of them. What I loved about this book was that it challenged an awful lot of the gender stereotypes that we see in our world today, and also that we see in fantasy generally. Women and girls are often expected to fall into one type or another, which could be like a pretty, wonderful, charming, witty young lady, or the tomboy, the rough around the edges, something like that kind of character. Those are the 2 stereotypes that we most often see, and in this book the 2 characters, Jack and Jill, are forced by their parents into one of those stereotypes each. Neither of them really gets any choice in the matter. They're kind of just raised in that way, and therefore they are forced into their situation. They're not able to truly express themselves, and there is something disingenuine about their lifestyle and the way they live it, until their grandmother starts taking more of a presence in their life, and she really helps them to understand that you don't have to be a certain way because someone is telling you that that is what your gender is capable of. You can be whoever you want to be, and you can be whoever you are, and you don't need anyone's permission. And what I love about this book and these characters is that they really embrace that, particularly when they do end up crossing over into a new magical world, which is what this series is all about. It's all about magical worlds and children going into them and the adventures that they have there. These 2 characters really get to explore their identity in this new world. They really get to understand that they don't have to do what their parents wanted because their parents aren't right in their approach. They're not letting them be themselves. They're forcing them to conform to something that society has deemed appropriate, rather than just allowing them to understand and grow who they are as people. And I love that this book deals with it in such a brilliant way. Alongside that, it's also wonderfully well written. Shauna Maguire has a lyricism, but also a very powerful tone of voice when she's writing, and that really helps these characters to grow and develop on the page in front of you, and I absolutely love them and would thoroughly recommend this to, I would say, anyone of YA young adult age and above. Next up, I have a character who is again from a young adult. This is Faith from the Lie Tree by Frances Hardinge. This book is one that I read kind of by chance. I wasn't necessarily looking out for it, but I got sent it and I wanted to read it because it was beautifully illustrated, and I'm so glad that I did, because it put me onto this author who clearly has a fantastic way of dealing with children, particularly young women, in fantasy and children's books. But our main character in this book, called Faith, is a young girl who is forced to flee to another island with her family when there's a big secret exposed about her father. She doesn't know what the secret is, she just knows that her family are going to this island where her father is going to do some research on an archaeological dig, and she and her family are just going to spend their time there away from the public and the press. But what she wants to find out is what the secret is, and Faith has a real sense of intelligence. She's very calm and clever, and she thinks her way through some tricky situations in the book. Her story is actually set in a time period where women were suppressed and pushed down, and yet Faith is resilient beyond belief and tenacious. Even when her father, the kind of idol of her entire world, says that she cannot do something because of her gender and that she must do something else, she must take a different path, she doesn't listen to him. She decides that she's just going to do it on her own. She's going to be independent, and what she does do is discover the secret that her father is hiding from, and also a whole lot more than just that. She is a brilliant character because of how incredibly well fleshed out she is, and the way that she resiliently bounces back from all of the criticism and the people who doubt her. She's very full of life, she's inquisitive, and she's exactly the kind of child narrator that I would have loved to read about when I was young, so I do not doubt that this is a book that would appeal to both young and older teenagers and adults alike, because it is a great, great story, and Faith herself is a fantastic and easy character to relate to and connect to. The next character that I want to talk about is from an ebook that I read, and this is An Exercise of Vital Powers by Ian Gregoire, and this follows the young woman Caden. Caden is not the sort of typical hero. She's actually incredibly dislikable from the very start. She is a bossy and overbearing character who thinks very highly of her own skills and talents, but not unjustifiably. She is, in fact, very, very gifted and very, very powerful. Kind of big-headedness is slightly justified. What I like about this character is that she is undeniably and unapologetically herself. There is no one and nothing in this world that is going to change her or shake her belief from being who she wants to be and who she believes she has to be in order to get revenge for something that happened in her past. She is definitely no one to mess with, but although she has a lot of these strong women characteristics that we see frequently in the badass characters, what I like about her is that she does terrible things. She is really, really bad in some of the situations. She really doesn't do anything for anyone but herself, and she gets herself into some really bad situations of using blackmail and sex and other things like this as deterrents against other people. And even though she does all of these awful things, she has a soft side that she just tries to hide from you. However, we get to glimpse it here and there, and when we do see these softer sides of her, we really understand that she is a lot more complex than first meets the eye. She's not just a badass character. What she is a layered character who has inner flaws, inner struggles, and really can't process some of the things from her past that are driving her to do these terrible actions now. She's definitely not someone I would use as an idol or as inspiration, but what she is and her determination and her strength that comes from within is really, really admirable. And even when you don't like her as the main character because you know she's doing terrible things, you have to admire the strength that she has as a character to continue down this path and really damage herself and others to get what she wants. Eventually, of course, things do turn around slightly and she starts to maybe make some better decisions, but she's just a very interesting character who has a lot of complexity going on to her as well. The next character I want to talk about is the main character from this series by Jodie Taylor. This is the first book in the series, although I think there are 8 out at the moment. It's called Just One Damn Thing After Another, and it's the Chronicles of St Mary series, and this series is one of my all-time favourites that I mostly read this year. I think I started book 1 last year, but the rest of them I read this year, and I absolutely adore Max as a main character. This is set in a world where history is tangible. People can actually travel back in time and they can study the events of history, like the big battles and wars and conquering and slaughtering, right in front of their eyes. So we follow an organisation that secretly does this, and at the head of that organisation, as one of the members of staff, we have Max. Max is a fantastically layered character because she defies the expectations of an academic. When I think of academic, my mind stereotypically goes to the old academic who sits in the library, never goes out and never does anything. Of course, that is not how most people are nowadays, but that's the stereotype that we built up in fantasy. And what this book and series does is completely break that fantasy stereotype. It really turns it on its head because the people in this book, and particularly Max, have to get in on the action of their worlds. When they are going back to see historical events and when they are getting involved in these events, they are really in the midst of the action and in danger. And what I love about this series, and Max in particular, is that even in the heart of some of these absolutely terrifying events that they go and visit, she is truly British, truly herself, and truly funny. There are so many moments where cups of tea are the called for medicine to something that's gone on and been terrifying, and there are so many moments where Max herself is witty or intelligent and manages to think and come up with her way out of the situation. She is definitely a character who I find really interesting because you don't see funny women in fantasy very often. Usually it's either derogatory or it's something that is used in a sexual way, whereas in this book it is just, she's a really funny character. She's really inventive with her joke, she's exciting, she's fun, she has a lively spark to her and a real sense of personality, and I can't recommend a series more highly than just being fun to read. So Max really makes this series for me and is the major reason why I've kept reading it the whole way through. I absolutely adore the rest of the characters, but Max is my favourite, and I certainly recommend her as a fantastic lady character that I can really get behind and relate to. The next one I want to mention is from the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan, and actually she mostly features in book 2, although she does have a part in this one, which is book 1, Age of Myth. I particularly like all of the female characters in this series, but I think there are a few who really stand out to me, and of those characters, the major player is Persephone. Persephone is a young woman who gets forced very early in the series into a leadership role that she never anticipated. She is part of a clan and she ends up having to lead this clan throughout a wartime that no one really expected. What I love about Persephone as a character is that she's not only someone who is strong and clever and that she can lead her tribe and her clan well, she's actually someone who is able to admit defeat and able to admit her faults when the moment calls for it. Sephi is able to ask for help. She's able to reach out to the people around her and get their help because they respect her and they trust her and they know that working together is much better for them all than being divisive and pulling apart from one another. What I love about this story, particularly book 2, is that in the second book we see the women, a lot of them, going into a situation where they have to go deep underground and they are surrounded and faced by monsters on all sides, and they have to rely and depend upon one another really heavily. And what I like about that scene in particular, but that whole section takes up a lot of the book, is that it really shows that women are just as capable in different ways as men, and they are able to overcome some obstacles because of their cunning, because of the way that they work together, because of the way they listen to one another and sympathise with each other and understand and relate to one another. And I love the fact that that is something Michael J. Sullivan is showcasing, particularly with the ladies. It's really well done, and it's something that I just think sells this series really strongly, that there are such a good, strong group of women, but strong in different ways, not just a warrior tribe lady. They're very different. The next character I have to talk about is Ren, or Renata, from Planetfall, and again she is the main character of this book, and my goodness is she great. She is one of the most complicated characters ever in terms of we really see into her mind. We feel like we are with her in the moment. Ren is placed into a situation that is so far removed from normal human life. She's on a different planet, she's living in a system of completely new technology, everything is modern and unique and crazy, and everything about the culture is new and being different from humans before. And yet what Ren brings to the story is a sense that even though the world and the planet they're on and every way that they live in their life is different from ours, it's all more advanced, more scientific, more crazy, still there's a sense of humankind and human struggles, and Renata has anxiety throughout this entire book, and she has different types of anxieties and mental health issues, and they are so prevalent in the story but so beautifully handled that I just couldn't resist putting her in really high up on this list, because she just brings something different to the world of science fiction and fantasy. The fact that she is so bare and raw with her moments of sadness and insecurity and upset is beautiful and heartbreaking all at once to read about. She really is a relatable character for many people, and also a character who, even if you don't have mental health issues yourself, will be able to help you understand what it's like to have them more. She draws you into the story, which is a great story in itself and really interesting, but realistically it's about her story and her struggle and the way that she deals with her problems, which is sometimes flawed. Sometimes she gets it wrong and she tries to run away, but she always comes back to knowing she's going to have to get there in the end and sort it out. And that's what she does, and I loved this book for her. She was the best thing about it, and the way that wonderful Emma Newman describes her is just absolutely fabulous, and I love her writing and her characters because they just feel so believable and so genuine to me. Next up, I have a character from a series, and I read the entire series this year, which is why I'm holding all of them up. But the series is called the Split World series, and it starts with Between Two Thorns, which is this one, and then there are 5 books in the series. And this series is one of my all-time favourites since reading it. It's absolutely stolen a place in my heart. And that is thanks in large part to the main character, Kathy. Kathy grows up in a split world, which is divided into 3 different worlds, 2 of which are magical and 1 is the normal human world that we know and live in today. It's present day. So Kathy is a wonderful character who is again very complex and flawed. She lives in this world of magic and mayhem, and she grows up in this world where women are definitely suppressed and put down and looked down upon by the men of the society. In fact, they are completely dominated by the men in their lives, be it their husbands or their brothers or the people that they have to marry. They are completely dominated, and there is very little freedom for women in this world. But Kathy is not able to be suppressed. She is intelligent and independent, and fiercely so. She wants to have her own life and her own choices in life, and she doesn't want to let men or anyone else rule her own identity or rule the path that she's going to take through life. So she runs away to Mundanus, which is the human world, and she hides there for a while until her problems start to catch up with her, and she realises that the only way to change her own life is to try her best to help change everyone in the magical worlds that she is part of. She then goes on to try her best to do this with the help of many of her friends and many other people who get involved in the story and are equally great. But there are so many struggles along the way, and this is a series where horrible things do happen to the main character, as is Planetfall. But it's just wonderful to read about because Kathy overcomes so much adversity, and she really, really is striving to change things and make things better. She genuinely believes that if she does her work and puts in the time and effort, then she will be able to get results, and that is proven time and time again. But against that, there are people working who do not wish things to change. They're stuck in their ways. They want things to be the same. And Kathy has to defy these people and stand up on her own 2 feet to do this. And there are times where she doubts herself and she's really upset and sad and really doubting her own abilities. But the people around her build her up and help support her. And she is then again fantastic as a character. I absolutely adore this entire series. I would happily read more and more in the same world, and I just would thoroughly recommend this main character Kathy as a fantastic lady character. Final character that I have to mention in this video is Thera from The Wall of Storms, which is book 2 in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. This is my top character of the year, my top character of all of the characters, but definitely my top female character. She is my favourite. However, I will say there are an awful lot of great women in this book in particular. Ken Liu does a fantastic job of just writing people, and it doesn't really matter on their gender because they are such individuals and they feel like such real personalities that you don't remember that they're female or male or whatever. But when it comes to listing great female characters, I couldn't not include Thera because she is the character that I most related to in the entire year because of her traits and her quirks. Thera is a young woman who is brought up in luxury. All of her childhood pretty much is spent in a luxurious place, and so she grows up learning all of these different facts and figures. She's very intelligent and she's given a lot of opportunities in her life. However, she also works incredibly hard to earn these opportunities. She is diligent and she is faithful, and she studies hard and she tries to earn people's trust. Her father is incredibly powerful, and she is thrown into a world where she quickly has to take on some of that power for herself and prove her worthiness. And over the course of the book, I think she does exactly that. She really proves that she is worthy of admiration and respect from the people who are under her, but also the people in her family who are above her or able to relate to her or have known her since she grew up. They all kind of understand where she's coming from and see that she has evolved and developed over her years. She is trained to lead, and when invaders start coming to her home, she does just that. She leads her people. For me, the biggest sense of kinship comes when a character is just someone you can relate to. And I really related to this character because she just has a lot of the same morals, ethics and ideas and ideals as me, which of course is going to make you relate to the character. Suffice to say, she is my top character for the year, but there are an incredible amount of great women in this book, and I would thoroughly recommend this entire series for the amazing diversity of women and the range of women in this story. I love it and I think it is great. So in summary of the 8 characters that I've just told you about, I think for me what it comes down to is relatability. How much of the character is something that is believable in a real person. Even when they're set in a fantastical world, how many of their actions feel like they would really happen or really be the consequence of whatever was going on around them. I personally find that if I can relate to them on an emotional or an intellectual or a fantastical level, then I can connect with them. But I do find that stereotyping really can take me out of a story, and I find it very hard to relate to characters who are just embodiments of already established stereotypes. Those are the 8 characters I've chosen from the books I've read this year as my favourites, but I would love to hear in the comments which characters from books that you've read this year are particularly fantastic representations of ladies in fantasy or science fiction. Please do leave me your comments because I would love to have some more examples and try some of them out, and tell me if you've read any of the ones I mentioned. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to go and check out the Book Smugglers blog. I will link it below, and I will see you all very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.